was such a beautiful rendering of Savitri by Narad and the lovely music. Crisis just vanishes. One just wonders, where is the crisis? Except of our own making. With the prayer of the mother, the storm, the sea is in turmoil. On the surface is the storm, the sea is in turmoil. But in the depths, there are calm, luminous and smiling expanses. That is the reality of this world. That on the surface is the storm and the turmoil, the conflict, the crisis. But in our own depths and in the depths of the world, there are calm and smiling and luminous expanses. And in a way, the whole effort of this world and nature that operates in it is to bring to the surface these calm and luminous and smiling expanses. It's difficult because the surface is not ready to hold, to receive the light that is concealed in our depths. We are too small, too fragmented, too divided within, too much restless and agitated to receive, to hold, to open and to become channels or manifesting instruments of that grace, that peace, that wideness, that love, that strength, that power, that wisdom that is always there waiting to express itself. The mother says in one of her well-known statements that beyond all our mind and its thoughts and conceptions, there is the luminous simplicity of the divine grace, waiting to act, if we allow it to do so. And I suppose the whole story and the drama of life relates to this if. Because between these depths and the surface, many players have come into the play. Many forces and beings and energies have been released into creation. Each, since it derives itself from something of the Absolute, wants to have its say, its final word, its last say. It has separated itself from its origin and it wants to create this world in its own image. If you really look at life, all problems arise from that. All conflict arises from that. It's really a very difficult problem because each one perceives this world in his own way, believes it to be true, believes it to be real, and goes on to create it. The best part is that another one whose worldview and self-view is just the very opposite also believes it to be true and believes it to be real and wants to create it. So there arises a conflict and a clash. And who is to determine what is really true and real? Except the divine in the depths, who knows the right place and the just measure of each thing in terms of time and space in this great drama of creation. All confusion and chaos and crisis comes as a result of that. In this epic unfolding, each force, each energy that has been let forth into this creation is given a field and a time to express itself. That's the beauty of this creation. Nothing is denied, everything is given an opportunity and a field to work. A time comes when it has outdone or outlived its utility, and then it must go. And the whole problem is when it sticks and clings and doesn't want to go. So there is a conflict and a resistance. On the other side, a pressure to manifest, and that in the outer surface consciousness of the world appears as a clash, a conflict and a crisis of events and circumstances. Aurobindo, while speaking of the avatar and his work in the essays, he says that action and event have no importance in themselves, but for the idea they represent and the force that is there to serve the idea. So behind every action and event and circumstance of a life, there is an idea which is pressing for manifestation. This idea is not just the mental figure of the idea that we hold. Mental figuring of an idea is often a disfigurement of a truth. It's an idea that is pressing to manifest, and there are forces that serve the idea. And that is the significance of any event or circumstance. And then Aurobindo goes on to say that the conditions in which the avatar descends, though it appears to the outward human eye a crisis of events and circumstances, is in its depths always a crisis, an evolutionary crisis. It's a crisis of consciousness. It is like first scene of a great act is over, and there were various actors in the scene who have lived their part. The curtain must drop and a new act must begin. But these players like not to move away from the scene, so they must hold on. And it's very difficult. And that creates a sense of tussle and conflict of forces. Of course, it's both fashionable to speak of forces, and it's also appears a bit, if one speaks of things like forces, behind this tangible, sensible world, you suffer the risk of being branded as a religious person. But at some point, if we have to take the yogic vision of things, we cannot escape but this necessity and the inevitability of understanding the deeper forces which are at work. It's true that our sensory mind does not see them. This is one fact. It only bears their shocks and wonders at the hidden cause of things. So when someone falls ill, one goes to a doctor, and the doctor tells us that his kidney is packed up and gives a solution how to support it through the transit. But there is behind this packing up of the kidney the play of deeper forces. But the doctor won't believe because he doesn't see it. So what is the solution? One solution is that we helplessly submit to the crass, materially scientific worldview, which has lived and I suppose outlived its purpose. Or else we grow anew, we grow through a process of yoga, discover what lies in our own depths, and act on the strength of that knowledge. This is precisely what we experience today. If you go back 100 years back, we see that at the level of 100 years, maybe around that, the peak of darkness, if one may say, we can almost see that the forces that were at work in this world, material science had declared that there is no God, but only electron playing with itself. Biological science had discovered that man is nothing but the descendant, not the ascendant of an animal. And his sole business is to survive, and if he is fit, he survives. If he can bully his way, if he can push everybody around, like the bear and the monkey, he will survive. And that's what is the business of life. And that's what is the purpose of all our striving and labor. The psychological sciences had declared that yes, of course man is a beast, and all this talk about higher is nothing but a shadow of the lower. It's an imagination, an aberrant gland. When the thyroid ticks fast, then men imagine God. And when it ticks faster, they die imagining God. And all these visions and all these feelings, all these beautiful things that we experienced just half an hour back, collectively are a problem with the brain. The EEG has to be checked, and we all need to see a doctor, a qualified psychiatrist. That why are these people sitting here when so much is happening out there in the world? This was 100 years back. Things are different now. So we had on one side a materialistic positivism, a scientific materialism or objectivism. On the other side we had a completely Darwinian view of evolution, and we had also the Freudian psychology, and we had the Marxist view of life, where basically they are all friend in arms, nothing else, where we must snatch what we must, like an animal snatches his food, only we are better animals, so we must use guns and not teeth and claws. On the other side, there was seemingly its opposite, but serving towards the same end. The imperialistic view of life, where the few and the fortunate have the right and the power. By what? Not by knowledge, but by the might of things, to govern the many and the unfortunate. The result is what we see today. In a kind of, we know Aurobindo's humor, and Dilip Kumar Roy once wrote to Aurobindo, quoting from Anatole France's celebrated sentence, some of us may know it, observations, that is there really a God in this world? If there is God, then why there is so much evil? Either he could do something about it but would not, or else he would do something about it but could not. If he could do something about it but would not, if he could cure this world of evil and suffering but would not, he is perverse, logical. If he would do something about it but could not, he is impotent, logical. And if he could do and would do something about it, why doesn't he do it? He shot this question to Aurobindo. Back comes the reply that, Dilip, there is the other side of the story, that Anatole France met God in some heaven of irony and raised this question to him. And God replied that, Anatole France, I have always been a little bit of a retiring predisposition. So when science and industry came with its power to change this world, I said, go ahead. And it had its play. But what is it I hear? The reports that reach me are not very pleasant. What is it, Anatole France? If science and industry could change this world, but would not, then they must be perverse. Things don't seem to be very happy upon earth. And if they would change this world but could not, they are helpless. And if they could and would, why don't they do it? So essentially God allows, God is probably not a very good term, but let's say the divine, the one consciousness behind all things, the perfect, allows the play of these forces. And each has its own term to play. Yesterday we were speaking of the story of Ravana. And Aurobindo has a poem called Ravana. So Ravana is threatening this whole earth, and the Atri Rishi goes and prays to Krishna. I don't know where is this story from, because I have tried to figure out where is it from. I have not been able to locate the source, but Aurobindo has written it. So it seems that this probably is an occult happening which he has documented. Because Atri Rishi going and praying to Krishna that Ravana is threatening this earth, so please do something about it. And he laughs and says, I have given him a term and a lease. He will do his bit. When the time comes, he will go away. So it's very interesting that in this world, so long as a certain set of forces and idea govern, and they are allowed a term, they continue, and human beings, though it's not the best of situation, but they don't get the sense of a crisis. They as if are reconciled to a certain way of life. But a time comes when there is inside the sense of an anguish brewing up, as if something becomes increasingly restless. And strangely and paradoxically, even when things outwardly appear fine, and it gives the sense of a crisis. If you really look back about 100 years back of which we are speaking, people had reconciled to certain ways of life. Let me give an example. Women were oppressed and they accepted it. There was no crisis. That's one way to resolve a crisis, the most stupidest of ways. They had reconciled, and if you talk to the women of their age, they are still reconciled, and though they have suffered and struggled, or suffered, not struggled really, suffered inside and struggled inside, they still don't understand the modern woman who cries for liberation. It's a strange paradox, because it was a situation when the idea force of the old world was so much gripping the consciousness of humanity that humanity took it that this is the only way to live, there is no other. And this way to live had all kinds of sanction, religious, scientific, moral, social, conventional, every kind of sanction. Take another example, many, like we know that 100 years back when Aurobindo was writing very fiery speeches and very fiery letters and talks in the Hindu Prakash, many of his own colleagues, I am treading on dangerous territory, politics is not my strength, it's my weakness, but nevertheless, I am sure Aurobindo will steer me through it. So many of his colleagues found it too difficult. What is it? You are openly challenging everything. No, let's ask for something more reasonable. You are challenging a whole worldview, a whole empire. And you are trying to say that there is a way of looking at life which is far greater and far superior. That cannot be. After all, Let's ask for something more reasonable. Let's ask for kind of, okay, give us little more freedom within ourselves, but govern us. But Aurobindo was releasing new idea forces in this world. If you see the period during that time through the Arya, all his writings, he was releasing new idea forces into this world. And the impact of these idea forces, it's only now we are beginning to little bit feel. And these idea forces can be very strong, very pernicious in their effect. Their effects can sometimes come after 1,000 years. In one of his early writings, Aurobindo reveals the reason for India's fall, despite once being a mighty civilization. It's true if we really read through. Yesterday Shradhalu was speaking of the Vedic age, and it was a mighty civilization, why it fell. And while going backward, he pins the needle on the spot where India began to follow the dharma of illusionism, Mayavad. Now you see, Mayavad is an idea force. It was released into the Indian thought 2000 years back. Even before that, with Buddhism, the sense of illusionism that came. And subsequent to that, Sankara only affirmed it even while he was negating it. Look how what I am trying to say is that how these ideas can use seemingly absolutely opposite things to actually force them upon the world. Buddha speaks of a nihil and nothing beyond. Shankara is not happy. He wants to contradict what Buddha has said and affirms it in principle, though negates him in theory. It doesn't matter whether we say that there is a nihil or whether we say there is the Advaita consciousness. The fact is, this world is illusion. This was what the idea force was trying to manifest in this world. Why this was happening? Because on the other side, Aurobindo gives another reason why this is allowed. Because behind all the play of idea forces, there is the one who is watching the play. Why he allows this? Because of this one idea, the entire Indian thought falls through steps after steps after steps. Till there comes a time when plundering, invasion, everything is regarded as this is after all illusion. Who is plundering and who is the plunderer and what is being plundered? All right, so long as my house is not plundered. If it is safe, it's fine. This has happened all over the world, in different ways. I mean, mysticism itself took a very otherworldly turn all over the world. Religion started looking into the beyond and not connecting itself to earth. But in India, its impact was felt in a way unprecedented because India carried that light which was linking up spirit and matter. There was a work going on, so one felt that impact. On the other side, while this was happening, that the spiritual glory which would manifest upon earth and try to link it, that was receding into the background. Slowly God started becoming further and further from this world, because this world was a field of illusion, so all kinds of forces could come and have their say. And spirituality became further and further in some remote, inaccessible heights, some silence of the Himalayas. So people started shunning this world, running away from this world into caves, mountain tops to find God. They started seeking some kind of a silence and peace of contemplation to find God, because He was no more in this world. This world was illusions. See the impact of one single idea, how nasty it can be. And this world was being filled up by another kind of forces of reason. We had the age of enlightenment, which was basically referring to irrational enlightenment. And we see almost from Socrates' illustrious disciples and then Aristotle and subsequent impact of that age, and reason started working into this field of globe. And reason started looking at life, and reason started analyzing life, and reason started giving us new theories about life. And it had its play. For almost 2000 years it had its play. The result, the end result, is another kind of crisis. So what we see today is an old world built on the edifice of a scientific materialism with reason at its peak and senses as its witnesses, where faith has been outcast, where God has been turned into a remote sanctuary, if at all there is, as Aurobindo says, vision and vain imagination deemed. And this world is governed by these forces which in this last century reached a pinnacle. Because it's the natural result. When we follow a certain cycle, it must reach its logical end. So the logical end is we have not touched the bedrock of matter. The scientist stands there in the electronic void. Yes, that can be a good term. And he stands and says, whither do I go from here? I see the end of matter. I see the end of science. And I see nothing but void. What is there in this void? It's frightening. The second idea that this life is nothing but competition and strife has led us to a kind of worldview where today we see each group is struggling and striving with another just to survive. This idea has ruled the roost and it still won't give way. It's crash of circumstances which are pushing us towards a more cooperative kind of outlook of life. Otherwise, the extreme form of competition went to this extent that within a household, one son was competing with another son. That was the height, Everything was breaking down into that. And whoever was better in terms of his outer success, he was the one who was given the better chance and better status, where the other was relegated into the background. It's the height of this worldview where we look at life only as a struggle for survival. And same with our Freudian psychology, that it reached the result of this kind of psychology was completely to announce that, well, man is nothing but a bundle of instincts. And if man is a bundle of instincts, then the highest ideal that he can follow is the MTV and the V channel. I don't know whether it exists here or not, but it is there in India. So I'm speaking of, Because if that's what man is, nothing but instincts, sexual instincts and aggression instincts, then what's wrong with WWF and WWE on one side and MTV on the other? They are the natural consequences. I'm not saying there is anything right or wrong with it, but they are the consequences of following a certain line of idea and certain line of force. And now, a new thing has come up. So long as human beings reconcile to this situation, there is no problem. But as we are told that the crisis in which the avatar appears is a crisis of consciousness, and he comes to release new idea forces into this world. That is the deeper meaning of the famous shloka of the Gita. When does the avatar comes? He says, the avatar comes in a state that whenever there is the glani of dharma, there is a diminution of that idea force which holds this earth, that great truth, that great light, that great wisdom which holds this world, that is diminished. And there is a free play of darkness, and this darkness has such a free play that it begins to oppress the heart of the earth. And there is something concealed in it that wants to be born always. There is an anguish and a cry which is hidden in the heart of the earth, which all of us feel in our quiet moments or even in the midst of life. There is something in earth that wants to take birth. And the whole history of earth, as we have been sharing yesterday, is an effort to bring out that which is concealed in it. Aurobindo describes it very beautifully. That I'll just read it out because it's something very powerful passage. That what is it that the earth is trying to release? Along a path of aeons serpentine, In the coiled blackness of a nascent course, the earth goddess toils across the sands of time. So she is trying to release something. It's the labor pains of a birth. A being is in her whom she hopes to know. A word speaks to her heart she cannot hear. A fate compels whose form she cannot see. In her unconscious orbit through the void, out of her mindless depths, she strives to rise. A perilous life her gain, a struggling joy. What most she needs, what most exceeds her scope. There is actually if you look at even individually, all suffering is actually a cry within the depths for a new birth. All suffering is actually a longing. If you really look at it, any suffering, whether it be physical, emotional, psychological, individual and collective, behind suffering there is a longing for perfection. And suffering is a mistranslation of an aspiration. If I have an illness, on one side this is a cry that I should be well. On the other side there is an anguish, I wish we never fell ill. If I suffer emotionally, a shock or a setback, behind it there is an anguish, I wish things were perfect. People could understand me. What is that thought which most depressed people have? Why am I so much misunderstood? Behind that, why am I so much misunderstood? I wish I could be understood. So simple like as that. And this is the longing inside earth. And what does it seek and need? A mind unvisited by illusions' gleams. A will expressive of soul's deity. A strength not forced to stumble by its speed. A joy that drags not sorrow as its shade. For these she yearns and feels them destined hers. Heaven's privilege she claims as her own right. So this is the anguish in this earth, and there are moments when, because of the acute oppression, often we wonder that why does the divine allow this kind of a darkness to have its full play? Why is it that there must be a Kansa to have the advent of Krishna? Why should Ravana come before the birth of Rama? Why should there be nasty kings who would destroy and slay every child before Christ must come in his splendor and his glory? The reason is that without that anguish, matter is so dull, it does not feel even the urge. When everything is fine, then the first thing we do is to forget the depths, forget the heights, and we are so comfortable in our cushy life. So when God, decides to make us grow, He sends us to school. And when we go to school, it's not a very happy experience. Most children know and most mothers know that this is a very terrible time, to send children to school, because it's very painful. It's very painful for the parents, very painful for the child. His neat world is collapsing. So today we see a very similar kind of crisis, that all the illusions gleams, they are collapsing. The complete scientific material view, which seemed to be complete, everything we have known, just about 30 years back. I remember, having joined the Air Force as a young medical graduate, and each one has his own ideas. I had my own ideas, and in the party, if you don't drink, you are regarded, no, you don't drink? What kind of a man are you? So it's like strange, as if you are doing a sin. If you don't drink alcohol, it's like as if you are sinning. And if you talk about divine and God, then people look askance at you, that something is wrong seriously with this guy. This is not much time back. And I can tell you things have changed. Today it's fashionable. In fact, within 20 years they had changed. When I had joined, this was the situation. It was almost like an initiation ceremony into Air Force. They talk, you must have a drink. So if you say no, they suddenly what? You are in the military and you don't drink. So you are like a fool. And 20 years later, it was amazing to see that among those who were, fighter pilots are the cream of the Air Force, who have a very stressful life. And most of them were free of alcohol and they were on a vegetarian diet. Not because of us doctors telling them anything. It was the way the world was expressing a new will and a new idea. Who was doing it? How this happened? Paritranaye sadhunam vinashaya jatushkritam dharma sanstapna sthaye sambhavami yuge yuge. One single will becomes omnipotent. And it begins to push a deep force, a deep thought, a deep idea into the world. How does it do it? In one of her experiences, the mother describes as, she says, what I would call as the yoga of the world. What is yoga of the world? So she goes into that state where she's identified with her highest state of love. This is not human love. This is the love which is so powerful. In fact, that's another problem with our human mind, that all these ideas, they get a twist in the human mind and they change into their meaning. For instance, freedom. When the divine speaks of freedom, it's the highest freedom. A freedom which is unfettered by any limits of the mind, any thought, idea, or vital preferences. It's free utterly into that Sachidanand state. But the mind immediately turns it into the sense. It's a freedom, means I can do anything I feel like. It leads to chaos. Similarly with love. The love that Mother says in one of her passages, conversations, that if the divine love were truly to manifest itself, most human beings will find it hard to bear. They will find it cold, impersonal and aloof. In one of her prayers, she describes the state that love is an impersonal force. Talk about it. The last thing we associate with love is an impersonal force. He says it's an impersonal force, and only the very pure, the very true. And then she compares it also with the force of beauty. She says beauty also, like love, is an impersonal force, and not the crude name that people have given to it. She speaks of that. And only those who are very pure and very strong can bear it, because it's so impersonal. As long as we have a single preference towards this or that, we cannot bear the power of love. In Savitri, there is a description that she bears this power of love, that burning test of the Godhead in our parts. It burns and eats the ego. When the power of love enters into the human heart, it eats away the ego, licks away every thought and every feeling that is egoistic and which limits us. It destroys and shatters the limits and releases us into a greater ananda and beatitude. That's its working in the human consciousness. That's why Aurobindo describes Mahakali as one having an intense love. But the same Mahakali at the human plane is experienced as a destroyer of evil. So she experiences this love and she's pumping this love into this universe. He says, with each throb, this love was going into this universe. And there were elements which are receptive and they grow. There are elements which shrink and it shatters. It's like a giant tsunami, and yet it is love. It takes time to understand that the hand that smites and the hand that succors are not two. They spring from the same heart. And this is the kind of force and the idea that Aurobindo was releasing into this world, that which will liberate and uplift the humanity that is ready. At the same time, this idea force is pushing darkness further and further and further into the depths. There is a very beautiful description in Savitri of this acute crisis, where death typifies the old world. What is this crisis? If we have to really understand this crisis, it's best described in the debate between Savitri and death. Death typifies this crisis, this old world. Death has built this old world. Yesterday Shraddhalu was very beautifully telling us about the eater eating himself is eaten. This is the old world, this is the pattern, where everything ultimately goes into the hands of death, into the mouth of death, and is created by death. Even mystics of traditions in the last 200, 300 years, if you hear even a famous and great mystic, he ends up saying that what is this world? It is a food for death. And the difference is, some he has already swallowed and some he is keeping in his lap to swallow tomorrow. That's how it's described. Jagat chabina kalka, kuch mukh mein, kuch bodh. And so it says the way out is get out individually of this zone of death. This is the old idea. And it has asserted itself in many ways. We have just spoken a few things of scientific materialism, Freudian psychology, Marxist ideology, a kind of, ultimately this world is a field of death. If there is a beyond, maximum, this field admits that if there is a beyond, it's somewhere there. I don't care. It may be hallucination, it may be an imagination, it may be real, we don't care. The last baton that death throws to Savitri, he says, okay, there may be a God, I don't care. But this is my fifth term. Don't bring him here into this world. I don't care if you go to the beyond and live with Satyavan or whatever, but there is nothing in this world. I govern it. It's darkness. And he takes several angles. All the theories which I am mentioning you'll find in the dialogue of death, his gospel, the vanity of the ideal. The very idea of establishing truth and light into this world is nothing but a vanity. He says it's nothing. He says all this. That's your gland which is going awry. You talk about divine and truth. Where is truth and divine? I don't see any love. It says that love dies before the lover, in the lover's heart. Before the lover is dead, love dies in the heart. And one is only waiting for the rest to follow. Though of course one cries copiously, outwardly. This is the tragedy and the irony of this world, that something in the depths wants to establish, but it would not. This is the whole old world pattern. And the more this new consciousness is asserting itself from the depth, this new idea force that Sri Aurobindo has released, Sri Aurobindo and the mother, the more the conflict is becoming acute and acute. In one of her passages, the mother explains why there is an increase of illnesses in this nowadays. And she says they are giving new name to every new illness which is coming up. And she says the doctors don't know why. And then with her, I would only say divine humility, because very few places Mother and Sri Aurobindo have said with this. She says, perhaps I know the reason why. I just wonder why Mother has to use the word perhaps. Of course she knows the reason. Only divine can say this way. If it was a lesser human, he'll say, I know it. You don't know it. So, she says, after having seen all, after having done all and lived all and achieved all, she says, perhaps I know the reason why. And he says it's because of the acute struggle and conflict of forces in the human consciousness and in the earth that is translating itself outwardly in the form of so many diseases. Can we imagine? And the more we fall onto the old solutions, the lesser we'll find the remedy. They don't work. They are not going to work. Even if they worked very well in the past, they will not work. Because such is the decree that has gone forth. A new element has been introduced into this earth, which is trying to assert itself in the mind, in the thought, in the heart of the race. It is pushing itself using various instruments. But equally, there are instruments of the old world which will not let go. And that is why this world is appearing, as it appears today, a field of conflict, of chaos, of struggle. The Vedic rishis saw this struggle as a struggle between the forces of light and darkness. just about 50 years back, when the famous Second World War was going on, Aurobindo says it's not just a war which outwardly it looks like as if, it's Hitler and Stalin on one side and some others on the other side, and it's simply a war of nations. But he says behind it there are actual forces that are at work, and these forces work in very deceptive ways. Imagine what they were whispering in the heart of Hitler, that he was speaking of the Aryan race, he was speaking of an elite race, and he was speaking of such things. Superman. But behind all these thoughts and ideas, what was working was a darkness, which was gradually revealed as events unfolded themselves. It doesn't reveal immediately because it's very deceptive. But as events unfold, the dark nature of this person was being revealed. Aurobindo, of course, knew it sitting in his room. When he saw Subhash Chandra Bose, there was a picture which was shown to him shaking hands with Hitler. And of course, many Indians were very happy. And look how superficial understanding can be so deceptive. I mean, who can deny the sincerity of Subhash Chandra Bose? He was really wanting to liberate the country, and he was a brave man, there's no doubt about it. But he didn't have the vision. So when he speaks of, he shakes hands so that he somehow wants India to be free. And he sees in alliance with Japan and Germany a possibility of freeing India. Very wonderful goodwill. But when Aurobindo sees it, he is reported to have remarked, he doesn't know with whom he is wanting to have a pact. If Hitler were to walk into India, in fact, he says to some of his disciples who in their heart, they simply felt that it is good if Hitler wins. After all, what's wrong? We'll be free from the Britishers. So Aurobindo says, there used to be notices issued in the ashram sometime that if you want to pack up this ashram, you must tell me, I will do it myself, rather than wait for Hitler to come and do it. He was forcing. Was he really? One would wonder that Hitler is sitting there, India is not even in his agenda, and if you read George's wonderful book, apparently he used to mumble during these states when he was possessed. He used to mumble, India was one of the things he used to mumble. So was it just one of those mumblings, or was there something deeper truth, a force which was directing him towards certain ends? And when we look at life from that view, everything changes. The same thing when, again, another example of someone with goodwill and even regarded in India as a pious man, even given the term of Mahatma. If you see Gandhi, he was also fine. Okay, if Hitler is coming, please lay open the doors, lay open the windows, give your houses, but keep your soul reserved for God. And Aurobindo had to again intervene and say he doesn't know what he's saying. The devil will not find a better opportunity to come in and govern this world and completely occupy it. So this is the conflict which of course was at its acute in the last century. I don't think there was a worse period or nightmare during the Second World War and the previous years. Actually, we today are very fortunate, and that's why I feel that the inscription that the mother gave on Aurobindo's Samadhi, to thee who has been the material envelope of our master, who has done all, hoped all, achieved all, struggled, suffered, achieved all for us. And he was doing it silently in a room. What gratitude one owes. Today we can breathe in a freer world. We can move like this. India can have its own destiny. Other nations can have its own destiny. The sun of an empire which never set is itself now struggling somehow to survive. The whole cycle as if has been turned, the tide has been turned in another direction. This has happened in the last 50 years. Where is Hitler and his tribe now? Gone. And nations can be free, they can breathe free. The women today can dress the way they want. They can speak freely for their own rights. They can enter into a live-in relationship and walk out. if they don't feel comfortable with the man, they don't have to be bound by legalities. Today's children can speak up for what they believe to be true. Who released this freedom into this earth? And how did it happen? We only see outward events and we look at social and political forces, but social and political and economic forces are themselves determined by something deep. Until we recognize that. And what is that struggle? Very simply, what are these forces of light? They are simply those forces which help this earth to grow towards a greater consciousness. Something which was all right and valid 100 years back is no more valid because they are releasing a greater light into this earth. And it is this which we are observing today as various kinds of crises. It is this cry of the earth which on the one side has become more and more prominent, and this sense of a grace, this sense of a greater and a truer consciousness which is pressing in every field, in the field of science, in the field of medicine, in the field of law, politics, administration. It's trying to express itself in the field of religion. Even in every field there is a will to know better, to know deeper. It is expressing itself in various ways, and there are forces that resist, the forces which want to pull back to the past formulas of life. That is being translated as a crisis. What is the way out? Of course, we'll be speaking of tomorrow, but Aurobindo describes this very beautifully in Savitri as to the real nature of this crisis and also hints at the way out. Ever surround our brief existence here grey shadows of unanswered questionings. We look for answers outside, we turn towards various thinkers, but their answers raise more questions, and their predictions fail and fly in the face of our knowledge. The dark, inconscient, signless mysteries stand up unsolved behind fate's starting line. An aspiration in the night's profound, seed of a perishing body and half-lit mind, uplifts its lonely tongue of conscious fire towards an undying light forever lost. Only it hears, sole echo of its call, the dim reply in man's unknowing heart, and meets, not understanding why it came, or for what reason is the suffering here, God's sanction to the paradox of life. Why does He sanction this? So this we can understand, as I was saying, the tragedy of life is that when it gets fixed into a groove, unless there is suffering and crisis, it doesn't awaken even to the need of something greater. So Kans must come and oppress this earth before the earth cries for the advent of Krishna. And it goes and says, this is there in the Indian myths, that earth goes and prays to the Lord that please come, I am oppressed by the weight of the Titan and the shadow. And then He comes, intervenes and changes the course of things. We don't see it. So how do we speak about it? One option is we simply accept to be within the frame. Well, that's one option and each one can take it. But the other option is to go beyond the frame and to discover. These forces are not to be accepted only as a matter of belief and credence. That's where religion is. Religion speaks of these forces. And now to speak about these forces, immediately in the scientific world there is shrinking. You immediately feel you are either deifying or demonizing. But these are real. Now one can understand the problem because religion has misused sometimes, many times. It has done witch hunting, it is also true. It is also true that religion has often accepted people to believe in these things without actually living them because it was not giving a way. The way was lost, but the belief was there. But yoga is not about belief and non-belief. Anyone who grows into the psychic vision and has even entered a little into the depth of yoga, just a little, I am sure there are plenty here who are I'm sure much better than what I have seen and experienced. And they have to tackle these deeper forces. They are so real, so concrete, almost material. And one can study them as a scientist studies their effect, how they influence even our physical states. I'll give you one small example. See when you suffer from common cold. See what was your state a day before. See if you are frequently falling ill. See what has been the inner state during this phase. What are after all stress diseases? But a cry for change. So if you really look at it, you can see in every field that stress diseases, nowadays stress is the number one killer. What is stress? Stress is the result of a certain attitude, certain worldview. And if you don't change the attitude, you continue experiencing stress. A person who came to me with depression, he was advised by another psychiatrist to go and play tennis, take a break off, play tennis, enjoy and come back and he'll be fine. And of course, he was given some antidepressants. So he went, that's in the sidelines. So he went and he became more and more stressful. So when he came to me, he was telling his story. He said, the problem was when I went there and I literally followed the advice. And the problem was when he started playing tennis, he wanted to compete and come fast to win every game. So he started getting stressful on a holiday because it was nothing to do with playing tennis. I think I have shared this story with some, but I remember this. One of my next door cardiologist in a hospital setting where I was working walks and says, I am under stress. So I asked what happened. He said, I am worried I may get a heart attack. He's a cardiologist. I said, why? He says, when I go on the road, I see a car and I want to overtake it. I said, fine, what's wrong with it? Go ahead and overtake it. He said, no, then there is another car in front. So by the time he reaches home, he is completely as if, tensed up, all wound up. It's a question of attitude. Now, unless this attitude changes, we may do anything, but is it really going to work? So this is where we see that even in so-called now stress diseases, then we are talking of lifestyle diseases, lifestyle changes. Finally, we will speak of attitudinal diseases. And when the next step will be that we will discover that behind these attitudes, what are the forces that determine that our attitude swings in this direction or another? There are forces that completely can change our attitudes overnight. I mean, there are people who have gone and, I can share this, that how these things can work in a way, and when you have experienced them, you can't just resist speaking about them because they are real and natural to you. I'll narrate a very small, I am literally following your advice, Sartaj. So I am narrating something which happened 25 years back. So normally we don't speak about any personal experience, and I am not speaking again of anything deep, something very superficial. So this is one of my first touch with Aurobindo and the mother. So I entered into Bangalore Bhavan and I saw the mother's picture in front, and for many years I had taken a stance that I am not going to bow down before a human guru, divine is inside. And before that there was a phase of atheism or agnosticism, and then there was this phase of, why do people go to human beings? After all, they are same, you don't have to do that. And anyways, there was a series of experiences. I will not speak of that, but when I stood before the mother's picture, the background was that, I heard a kind of a adesh. But what an adesh. People hear nice adesh, do this, or a plan of yoga is unveiled, or go here. I had an adesh, stop smoking. Now, the strange part is that I used to smoke, and last 3 years I was struggling to give up smoking. Within 2 months I had realized, I had picked it up as a fashion. You are a doctor, and if you don't smoke, and I said the kind of culture and milieu was there, if you don't smoke, you are kind of, this fellow, is a bit crazy. So it was very nice to hold a cigarette in the hand, and you look like an intelligent doctor, even if you are not. So then I realized that this is a hypocrisy. I am smoking, and how can I tell others that I, don't give up smoking? So I discovered an inner conflict inside me. And then I discovered it's not a good thing. And of course, when I got married, for sure I knew it's not a good thing. So I have to give up smoking. So I was struggling. I changed my brand. I started having costly cigarettes. I found myself buying costly cigarettes. Then I said, I'll not keep at home. So I was walking 3 kilometers to pick up a cigarette. I said, this is worse. And I had friends, always you have good friends who give you bad advice. So when friends came to know that I am smoking expensive brands, and friends were all pilots going around the country, so they would get expensive brands for me. So I said, this weird kind of friendship. So the net result is I failed. Honestly, I failed. I could cut down to a point, but beyond this was not going. So I'd kind of reconciled to a position that, okay, 3 cigarettes a day, I'll lose these many years of my life. Like many of us do. So when I stood before the mother, instead of hearing some adesh of, surrender, you are mine or something, I heard, stop smoking. Believe me, I walked out a free person. Never after that I even felt the urge to smoke. After 5 years, just to test myself, I picked up a cigarette in hand. Because till date I don't understand. Because I don't remember even an attitude change inside. So I picked up a cigarette, took a puff and experienced the same horror that I experienced when you take a first puff. The cough so I threw it. I said, this would be foolish if I, destroy this grace. But people have done that also. There was a famous case of one of Sri Aurobindo's disciples who would say in the evening, I have resolved, I will never smoke. So since how long? Since yesterday. So, there are cases like that. But there is a fact of intervention which completely changes all the forces inside. I am sharing this on a very intimate note because this is real. I cannot explain it. I have no understanding of this event, but it has happened. That it changed, cut through all the attitude, lifestyle, everything, and in one moment, hardly I was standing for 5 minutes, I was not even meditating, I just walked out a free person. So this is just to show how the intervention of which Narad spoke just before this beautifully, and the lines I am saying is just preceding it. So, the intervention, the divine intervention which can change the entire course of things. But few can look beyond the present state or overleap this matted hedge of sense. Just a few more minutes. All that transpires on earth and all beyond are parts of an illimitable plan. The one keeps in his heart and knows alone. Our outward happenings have their seed within. And even this random fate that imitates chance, this mass of unintelligible results, are the dumb graph of truths that work unseen. The laws of the unknown create the known. In India it's known as the karmic law. There are karmas which unleash energies that comes back to us after centuries. That's why one should be so conscious about everything that one does, thinks and feels. Because these are energies let into motion. The events that shape the appearance of our lives are a cipher of subliminal quiverings. What is going on in the depths is the real thing, real event. The battle of the gods and the titans, which the Puranas speak of. Outside we just see a cipher of these quiverings, just a little bit of spillover of the current. I actually had a friend who saw in his dream Mother and Sri Aurobindo fighting with the dark adversary to save his soul. He actually saw. And he was horrified. Because he saw it and he didn't understand. He ran to me, is it true? He was not really a devotee. He had heard about Mother and Sri Aurobindo through me and had some general kind of faith. So these things happen inside and outside they just reflect in bit of depression, bit of problems, bit of conflict, some disease here and some pain here, something there. Are a cipher of subliminal quiverings which rarely we surprise or vaguely feel, are an outcome of suppressed realities that hardly rise into material day. They are born from the spirits, son of hidden powers, digging a tunnel through emergency, extreme darkness through which the world must pass. is a tunnel that the divine digs through emergency. So it's so interesting when we look at it like that, then we say thanks to all this crisis that we are beginning to look deeper. Otherwise we would have been too satisfied with ourselves. But who shall pierce into the cryptic gulf and learn what deep necessity of the soul determined casual deed and consequence? Who shall pierce? How to do it? Is there a way? Will the scientist do it? Will the intellectual do it? Will the religious man do it? Who will do it? So Aurobindo is giving us a hint. Absorbed in a routine of daily acts, our eyes are fixed on an external scene. We hear the crash of the wheels of circumstance and wonder at the hidden cause of things. This is what we do. So long as our eyes are fixed on the external, we are never going to understand the secret of life. So long as we are only analyzing the outer and the outer and the outer, we will only play with the mud. So what is the solution? With these three lines we will stop. Yet a foreseeing knowledge might be ours. Yet a foreseeing knowledge might be ours if we could take our spirit's stand within. If we could hear the muffled demon voice. So this is just an overview. We have in the evening question answers. If there is any quick question, maybe we can take. Yes, Nara.
Thank you for the personal story because it means so much to all of us. And if you would just touch for a moment on your vision, understanding of Iran, North Korea, and terrorism.
Narad, I would wish that you should tell this. About North Korea, definitely Aurobindo has himself written very clearly. And it's published, it was one of his notes given to Mother India in the early issues. The whole affair is plain as a pikestaff. That it's not just North Korea. I hope I'm safe. I have to go back. Mother is the safety and refuge. But anyways, the thing is that it's not just North Korea. There are forces which are behind, and whether we name it or not, but the big country which is sitting right behind it, which is pushing it to further a certain ideology. So definitely the North Korean crisis, and if we really look at, we don't have to really go very deep, the kind of virulence that the country brings out is very clear that if it's not kept in its place, it can be very dangerous and a threat to the world. In many ways, a similar situation, they are definitely interlinked. The kind of worldview which, let's say, takes women to a state of confining themselves in a certain worldview and a life view where they don't have freedom, where they don't have their say in things. Whether they willingly accept it or not is not the issue at all, but definitely that worldview is not at all a very healthy worldview. And definitely it is anachronistic in today's times. All terrorism is, much of terrorism is springing up from that it is a fierce assertion of a certain worldview, and it wants to assert itself by force and by a certain degree of exclusiveness, that I am the only one who is right and I assert myself in this way. Of course, terrorism is a very complex phenomena, but definitely it springs from the bowels of the earth. It is something very dark, dangerous, and it's a very big subject. Actually, I am little worried. I am holding back myself that if I let loose, I may end up, with another hour. So I will just share a few lines from Savitri to show how deep and penetrating Sri Aurobindo's vision had been, and how he had foreseen all this, all this terrorist act in the name of freedom. They do it very much in that name, that they have a right to do what they want and they justify it. So we have this line which, from the world of falsehood, Yes. It's a very long passage. I'll just read about 10 odd lines. But I would suggest that those who want to understand the deeper forces which work behind this creation, please read Savitri. And especially with regard to this darkness that we see engulfing, what is its nature? How many masks it can wear? This darkness is wearing many masks, not just one. Terrorism is one of the masks that this darkness is wearing. Very strangely, it can wear, as I said, seemingly opposite mask also. So this is, as we were talking of Buddhism and the Shankara kind of Vedantic lore, that it can wear, because its power is like that. Now we will identify terrorism here, and this is the nether bottom, rock bottom of the world of falsehood, where Sri Aurobindo is describing. This was religion, this was nature's role. In a fell chapel of iniquity, to worship a black, pitiless image of power. Kneeling, one must cross hard-hearted stony courts. Incidentally, this is an actual act which is done, where I won't say, but some people know it. This is an actual ritual to be done in one of the places of worship. Kneeling, one must cross. Kneeling, one must cross hard-hearted stony courts. Actually, this image is very vivid. So please keep it in the mind. If you really go back, you will know where it is being done. In a fell chapel of iniquity, to worship a black, pitiless image of power, kneeling, one must cross hard-hearted stony courts, a pavement like a floor of evil fate. Each stone was a keen edge of ruthless force, and glued with the chilled blood from tortured breasts. The dry, gnarled trees stood up like dying men, stiffened into a pose of agony, and from each window peered an ominous priest, chanting Te Deums for slaughter's crowning grace. Uprooted cities, blasted human bones, blasted human homes, burned writhen bodies, the bombshells massacre. We have the foolish audacity to talk about Sri Aurobindo in terms, sitting in one room, he knew everything that is going to happen 100 years hence. The least we can do is to have gratitude. Uprooted cities, blasted human homes, burned writhen bodies, the bombshells massacre. Our enemies are fallen, they sang. All who once stayed our will are smitten and dead. How great are we, how merciful art thou. Thus thought they to reach God's impassive throne. Their idea of God is very impersonal, impassive. And His grace is only, if you do these acts. And Him command whom all their acts opposed, magnifying their deeds to touch His skies. There no relenting pity could have place, but ruthless strength and iron moods had sway. A dateless sovereignty of terror and gloom. This took the figure of a darkened God, revered by the ragged wretchedness He had made, who held in thrall a miserable world, and helpless hearts nailed to unceasing woe, adored the feet that trampled them into mire. What a power this can have, that people, despite seeing it, would adore the feet that trampled them into mire. Speaking of the Iran crisis, people even justify it, it's fine. Even though the oppressed are happy with the oppression. Can we imagine? And sorrow with hatred, it was a world of sorrow and of hate. Sorrow with hatred for its lonely joy. Hatred with others' sorrow as its feast. A bitter rictus curled the suffering mouth. A tragic cruelty saw its ominous chance. Hate was the black archangel of that realm. It glowed, a somber jewel in the heart, burning the soul with its malignant rays, and wallowed in its fell abysm of might. These passions, even objects, seem to exude.